Hello, everyone. Today is Monday, February 11th, 2019. This is the Cluster API vSphere provider public meeting. This is a bi-weekly meeting for now. I want to remind everyone that if you're working on anything related to Cluster API, whether it's an internal project to VMware or you're part of another company, please be aware that this is a public meeting and anything you say here can be viewed by the community at large. So if there's anything secret that you want to keep, be aware of that. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and paste the link to the document in the chat. I'm going to paste it again because usually if I haven't started recording, it doesn't show up on chat. Okay. As always, if you would, if you can add your name and company information to the attendee list, that would be very helpful. And if you have any other issues that you want to add to, that you want to discuss during this meeting, go ahead and add it to the agenda. Okay. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then we'll get started. Okay, so the first item today was a suggestion by Nate last week. I think we discussed this over Slack and over GitHub. There were a couple of issues. Nate, do you want to go ahead and talk about this, or do you want me to give the general topic first? Okay.
Well, I can say a few words. I don't have a lot to say. Basically, I needed to support more recent versions of Kubernetes, and so modify some of the templates, and went into the code and made the smallest possible changes that I could make to the code to get Kubernetes 1.12, 1.13 working. And along the way, I was thinking, I don't really like this structure. I feel that, first we'd rather have some of these templates perhaps in separate files. We'd like to have additional configuration options besides just setting a few properties of the Kubernetes version. And beyond that is running the full Kubedium script on a blank OS, really the right way to go about it. Certainly you can save a lot of spin-up time if you have a library of more finished OVAs that have many of these components already installed. And certainly if you're working if you've got network concerns, you may not want to be pulling all of the Kubernetes binaries at cluster spin-up time. So it's more a set of topics for further discussion rather than something that I was going to propose.
Yeah, that's great. I put this under the topic of template improvement suggestions. I can address that last topic. We've been discussing with our new Heptio colleagues that there's a concept called machine stamping that we've been discussing. Mm-hmm. And we have a way to do machine stamping. Fabio can talk a little bit more about that, but that's not how we do it is not the topic for today. And the Heptio, our Heptio colleagues have a way of doing machine stamping. Their machine stamping is more for the node machines, and we've been doing machine stamping for the install OVA. And we want to, and every single provider out there, infrastructure provider out there, has a need for this machine stamping. So we created, Tim Sinclair created an issue in the Cluster API main repo to start this discussion. And I think what we're going to do is that we're going to figure out, we're going to create a cap for this machine stamping process, and we want to get some opinions from the community around this. You know, machine stamping. This is it's a very interesting topic. I presented some stuff at the AWS meeting about 2 weeks ago. And the question is, how far do you want to take machine stamping? Do you just want to create this this node machine, or do you want to do more with it? And so the idea of this quick starting OVA that has all the components already instead of running kubeadm, that is something that would fall under the machine stamping approach. Does that sound like it's something that could fulfill your need, Nate?
Certainly. I mean, we're flexible in what we're doing here. It's just try. Certainly the existing process is mostly okay. I think what I want to see is more configuration options in the short term rather than optimizing for speed.
Okay. So that is I think what we need now is to take these issues that you've listed and more. And I welcome everybody here. What else would you guys like to see in the
So if I may add, there was a discussion. So there are two aspects to this particular problem that Nate asked, right? So one aspect, definitely what you touched upon a lot, was the stamping. Like, you know, it's if we could stamp out definitely, you know, the OVAs that we can directly use, that's perfect. But the other aspect that I see that is also intriguingly part of this is how to extract out the scripts, like the init scripts that we run on the Bootstrap, or rather inside the OVA when the node comes out, the script, it's completely in the template.go, which Nate basically pointing to that it's kind of difficult to manage. And I completely 100% agree with that. One of the issue, so let me point out first thing. So this is a common issue across all providers. So today, at least as far as I know, pretty much all of the major providers for the cluster API, they have their sort of their init scripts are equivalent to that inside the Go code, which in general is not very great. So there was a discussion upstream. I put a link on the Google Doc or in the doc as well. There was a initiation of a proposal, some sort of a proposal to consolidate all these API provisioning that was started like last year. Yeah. There was a Google Doc around which people commented. I also commented there. But the general idea is that, you know, these configuration scripts, if we can extract that out as some type of runtime object. So for example, you could create an object that you could actually create with Kubernetes, like a config map could be one example, right? Something like that. So that would give an immense flexibility, number one, for us to say, okay, you know, for a given environment where somebody wants to use the cluster API vSphere provider, given on what kind of image they're using, they can easily tweak or modify what they want to do or how they want to do the bring up, which includes also like configuring all sort of configuration option that they might want to choose for their particular deployment, number one. So that is like one of that. So this proposal briefly touched upon that. I don't know if this proposal that I posted though is kind of hasn't really moved in a while. I see some people commented on 7 days ago. So maybe this is something that we can bring it up. Although in the short term, one of the mechanisms that I think maybe we can do while this broader proposal takes its own shape is what, for example, say GCP provider does. So GCP provider specifically today what they have done is they have created a config map wherein they bury all these scripts, and at the runtime in your specification you just refer to a config map where the controllers is going to pull the script to be run and execute and inject that. So maybe as a step one for us as a provider, maybe we can switch to just that mode, which should not be that difficult, I believe. But at least that will immediately give us all the flexibility that we need to say, oh, for my instance of running this provider, I need to do one additional thing, and I don't have to go to the code, change it, compile it, and build completely my own version of the cluster API controllers in order to deploy, which is sadly what the current state is. So maybe that is one thing that we can do.
So where's this config map that you're saying? Where is it pulling this from?
No, so essentially it's kind of part of your deployment. So for example, when somebody has, let's say, a vanilla Kubernetes and they want to deploy the cluster API, let's say vSphere provider deployment today. So today what they do is, using that customized tool, we generate a bunch of files that user would do kubectl apply to them, and that would get generated, right? So as part of that YAML file itself, we will also spit out the standard, let's say the standard shell script that we are using today in the form of a config map that gets created out of the box, along with the installation of your cluster API vSphere provider. And then you just refer to that, and that's about it. And you don't need to do anything different unless you really want to modify or do something different specifically to your environment, right? So that's number one. So the one other benefit I see of that model, if we were to go down that path, is we have another request that we want to support more guest operating systems. So the current script, of course, is only custom tailored to Ubuntu, at least in part when it comes to installing stuff. Which will definitely not work on, let's say, Photon or CentOS or others if we want to support it. But if you extract it out as a config map, now the community can actually iterate much faster, and we can actually generate, let's say, 3 variants of config map, one for Ubuntu, one for CentOS, one for Photon OS, and so on and so forth. So that may give us like a little bit more higher velocity in supporting different operating systems. So that is an additional benefit that we can get by that. I do want to talk one more point to Nate's comment. So one of the things is, Nate, today we do have a flag. I think it's called preloaded in our spec, that if you specify true to it, we do not do any install part. So essentially, if you have preloaded packages on your OVA or template that you're using, you can set that preloaded equals to true. And what that essentially does is it skips the install part of the script, and it only executes and writes the configuration part, which is saying it executes things like kubeadm init and configures the files. So it's more agnostic of even the operating system, if I may say.
The only thing about the preloaded flag is that you need to have your own custom cloud init image. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Siddharth, and load it as a VM template. So, I know that for the project that Siddharth works on, they have created that, right, with the Andrew Cook's data source.
Right, true. So again, the preloaded flag, the only point that I want to say, like this preloaded flag that I have, or that I mentioned, is specifically only for the case, like it seems like to me in Nate's environment, they are already creating some template to be used, right? So, and the expected usage maybe is, or one of the expected usages, when you deploy a cluster with that template, you don't want to do anything to do installation coming from the internet, right? You want to kind of do it in a completely sandbox environment. And and that also neatly ties down to the image stamping discussion that you mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
If you have image stamped image with certain binaries, then you can easily tie that along with, let's say, preloaded equals to true, so that you completely skip anything to be installed and you only go through the custom configuration part. So so I think these 3 topics kind of gel together. Maybe if there is enough need for the support, maybe we can prioritize, and we can have, if folks have time and can volunteer their time for, bringing these 2-3 things that I just mentioned, into reality, that will be fantastic. I think that will help us move much faster as a community.
So the thing about the machine stamping is that we're as you guys may know right now, that the community has chosen KEP as the approach that we're going to do new feature development, mostly in the KK, but I think over time the other projects, like for instance SIG, Kubernetes SIGs, are going to start doing the same thing. And that has a process in itself, and it's going to take some time for the machine stamping to formalize into a KEP and then to get accepted and to get implemented. But the topics around the configs, I've already wrote down that what we need to do now is just write up new issues for the template improvements. There was something else I wanted to say. Oh yes, the thing about the templates. Also, there's some things that Nate wants and that we want. Poses a operational workflow issues, right? Right now, when a user wants to create a new cluster, the user has to pass in a whole bunch of YAML files, and now we're going to, with the template improvements, we're going to ask them to pass in a whole bunch of other parameters, and this plays into the cluster bundle idea that Google has put out, and it's something that I think when somebody finds the time to like really look into that and see about potentially adopting the cluster bundle idea for passing the entire cluster package description into cluster API. So, given that, which should come first, which should come second, I don't know. I kind of think that the cluster bundle needs to be adopted before I don't know. I mean, we could do both at the same time, but I really would like to see the cluster bundle get in maybe in the next quarter. That's kind of out of scope for this quarter, but maybe something that VMware should really push for in the next release after V1 Alpha 1.
But like, are you talking about like the cluster bundle and basically the connection between cluster bundle and the image stamping? Are these the two?
No, the cluster bundle is mainly for the templates and how we break it up and how do we pass in more configuration. That's just more additional files that if they're using cluster CTL, if the user is using cluster CTL, that's just a lot of parameters to pass in. A lot of files to pass in, and that just increases mistakes. That's one of the complaints for the last open source project I worked on was that our CLI had so many parameters that customers did not want to use it.
I'm a little confused though. So just to clarify, like the cluster bundle that you're talking about, Locke, is that essentially to help, for example, say one goal would be, let's say, improve the usability of cluster CTL? Is that?
Yeah, cluster CTL or any other tool that's built on top of cluster API.
So I'm not very, so I probably have to read up on the cluster bundle, but my basic understanding that at least from a while ago was cluster bundle was more of a way to package and deploy and make cluster API itself available, like a deployer for cluster API.
That was not my understanding of it. I'll have to look at it again. But let's go ahead and move on because we're still on the first topic and we're almost halfway through the hour. So, let's go on, and I'll just put in here that. I'll add it, add the comment about the cluster bundle after the meeting's over. So the next topic is, I was hoping that Vince was here, but he isn't. There is a PR open right now. This is to add cluster name labels to machine. I haven't looked at this PR yet. I welcome everybody to look at it. I think Siddharth and Hui has looked at it. This is basically, my guess is that this is to support the work that's going on in the main cluster API repo right now to allow users to create multiple clusters per namespace. So now we're going to have a stronger a linkage between the cluster and the machines. Siddharth, you've looked at this PR. Is that my understanding is that this is providing the link between the machine and the cluster via labels?
Yeah. So the motivation for that having that strong linkage is to enable that use case of supporting multiple multiple Kubernetes cluster in the same namespace. But I think there may be some more work that needs to be done before you get to there. But definitely, as a prerequisite to that, one of the basic things that was merged recently was that the core controller code in the cluster API, now it depends upon this label to be present on the machine, so that's how it says, for a given machine, tell me what my cluster is. And to answer that question, that label needs to be there, and that's what I've been basically added that. So I think I briefly looked at his PR, and it seems, I mean, from the code, seems right, but I think there is a CI is failing, so there's maybe some minor modification that needs to be done, just an update. But other than that, yeah, this is kind of in line with what was merged on the main core cluster API repo.
So we welcome anybody in the community. If you want to review the PR, please go ahead and do so. Okay, so let's go on let's move on to the next one. I just want to keep a certain pace. So I know that last year there was a proposal to create something called a variant. And I'm bringing this up. I can't say why, but it's we bandied around what we should call this, and we agreed on the name variants, but we never discussed how we would implement this. And so let me refresh everybody's memory. So a variant is, today we use govimami to provision a VM. And underneath it, the VMs are, we expect kubeadm to start up in that VM. And that's today, the vSphere provider supports one variant, and that is the one variant. So what if, the community at large has not discussed what criteria and what requirements that we need to support other variants. And some of the topics that I think we need to address for supporting other variants, and I want to get other people's opinion on this and what other things that we need to look for. There are two things, right? The first is, how do we, so today the vSphere provider has one variant. If another company decides to add another variant, how do we switch between which variants we use? And the second is, how do we pass in the different configuration files to the other variants? So today we have our machine, our cluster, EMO, the machine set, machine deployment, etc. And let's just say that in the future, a specific new variant requires completely different parameters in the machines, YAML. That's it. So I flagged these two items as how would we support other variants given new provisioners and requirements for different configuration files for those variants. Does anybody else have any other things that we need to consider for supporting other variants in the future?
So maybe just one thought on the variant, which I don't know. So based on how you describe variants, I think in terms of the parameters, for example, say the API, specifically if you look at like the API definition today for the machines, like specifically the vSphere provider config part of it. I mean, I'm not very sure when we do talk about different variants that particular parameter or set of configuration needs to be changed, like, because there is still going to be just one set of API level contract that different variants have to adhere to. So the way I kind of think about it is you have, so your API is your contract, and you have a current set of implementation that uses things like GoVMami and kubeadm underneath the covers to implement that contract and basically make things into realization. A different variant would be, for example, that we all can relate to is like the Terraform-based implementation that was prior to GoVMami, which potentially could have worked with the same contract, but it's just that now it's a different kind of underlying implementation logic that is going through for provisioning and the lifecycle management of the instances, right? So now that's at least what I kind of envision from what different variants might be. So one variant that I can think about, for example, here is we could have another variant wherein we say, well, we still provision VMs with GoVMami, but instead of using, let's say, kubeadm, we are going, let's say, Yakety way of bringing the cluster up, for example, right? Like Yakety is just another shell script. For those who don't know, it's just another shell script that Andrew from VMware, he wrote to bring up Kubernetes that's being used in our CI. So that could be like one example of how this variants may go up. Now, the second question of how do you choose a variant when you define the machine? That's something that, again, as you mentioned, we have kind of settled on the name variant, but we've never talked about what does it mean, how does it get exposed in the API. And I think maybe we need to bring that topic again, revisit that in the broader cluster API meeting. But my 2 cents here would be, I would imagine that it's something driven through the user intent itself. So as a user, when I'm intending to say, create me a cluster, create me a virtual machine, or part of these clusters, that intent has to specify what variant am I choosing. So that means somewhere in the either definition or as an annotation or label, whatever means you have. But I kind of see a user choosing that variant in the definition, YAML definition of these objects that they create at the runtime. At least that's my 2 cents. I mean, cannot be gets it though.
So I agree with that. That it could be in the YAML definition. Today the main cluster API defines a CRD for a certain number of fields. And then the vSphere provider defines other fields in the vSphere provider CRD. And we could certainly add something that says, which variants to use. And if I'm just throwing this out there, I'm just brainstorming. And within that CRD, we can also define that if you're using like the vSphere, the GoVMami variant, it's using the existing CRDs. If it's not, then maybe use a different set of CRDs to pass in different configuration to the variant. That is one option. And I think that would fit into the current design of the cluster API. Now, how we would call the other variant, that's a good question. We don't have any plugin model yet for cluster API, or in this case, the actuators. When we had both Terraform and GoVMami, we kept both code in the repo, but we should allow for other companies to create their own variants and to plug in somehow, right? Well, anyway, this is an opportunity for KEP, and it's also an opportunity for further discussions. And I think I'm going to write up an issue first in the vSphere provider to get the conversation going, because this is actually a real requirement now. Potentially a real requirement. Since it's potentially a real requirement in the vSphere provider, we should probably discuss this here first, and then we could bubble it up to KEP to the main cluster API repo. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create an issue for this. Okay, the next topic is the content library support in Go vMami is imminent. I have an issue that we have a PR open right now, and this is for testing the OVA build process. And right now, it's waiting for support for for content library support in Go vMami. Hui, are you on right now? Okay, doesn't look good.
Yes.
Okay, you want to? Oh, so you don't need to. We don't need to discuss this issue, but Hui wrote some code in Python to support this, but unfortunately, it has some copyright issues, and so we decided to go ahead and delay this until Go vMami has support for content library. And internally, it seems to be tracking to, it's getting very close to getting integrated. This issue 164, a lot of us have already reviewed it. If anybody else in the community would like to go ahead and review this PR, please go ahead and do so. Okay, that was just more of an announcement. Okay, the next issue is from Siddharth. Go ahead, Siddharth.
Can you actually click that link? I mean, it's just a diagram that I created. I thought it would be easy to just explain for everybody.
Okay. Is it shareable publicly?
Yeah. Yes. It's just a representation of workflow. It's a workflow representation of our create code today. So one of the issue that we recently encountered and we tried to fix that was sometime what happens is due to certain timing issues or otherwise on the vSphere side, the VM will kind of continuously keep cloning and failing because we sometimes lose track of the previous task reference. And I know we kind of put in a fix right now to temporarily handle that. But as I was thinking more about it, I thought maybe we might have a different way of kind of handling that. And this is what so the things in the blue are really what the new part is. The rest is actually the representation of how the current logic works. So I know nobody has seen this diagram. This is just from what the workflow we have in the current create logic, I thought of just creating this diagram so that it's easier for anybody, just to understand what is happening, what the steps we are happening here. So in truly what I think one of the things that I think we can do is every machine object that we create, it has an ID, which is of UUID type. In vSphere, when we create a VM, we can actually create a VM using and specifying what the instance UUID we want it to be. So that's already there in vSphere. So one of the suggestions is maybe how about when we are creating the instance backing a particular machine object today, how about if we also start specifying the same instance UUID as the machine ID for that. So that'll give us two benefits. So in this case, if you look at the workflow, the create logic comes in and we say, check if the task reference is present. And if it is not present, there could be really two cases wherein we somehow accidentally missed updating the task reference in the previous diagram. So essentially the different rectangular boxes that you see where we have an update, different things like clear task ref or set VM ref or set a task ref. Again, all of these are updates on Kubernetes and they can occasionally fail due to various reasons. One of the reasons that at least I know of is if somebody else modified right at that point that cluster object or machine object outside the bound of the controller, that means the cache version that the controller code is operating upon, now it's an older version of the cache. So that means when you do an update, Kubernetes will reject that update because you're on an older version of the object. And it will catch up basically in the next iteration, but at least temporarily it will fail. So that could be one reason. And that reasoning is still true and it still holds. But essentially, as a mitigation of what I think maybe is when we do the task reference check, if we don't see, we can probably do a quick find VM by instance UUID, taking the machine ID. And if we do find the VM, which is actually going to catch the case where somehow for whatever reason, we couldn't either track the task reference, or something else weird happening, right? But at least if we found the VM, then we can actually go and actually set the VM reference to the appropriate one, and then kind of continue the logic. So with this like small addition, I think this could potentially like reliably, handle the case wherein, even if we miss certain updates or certain update tasks were failed, right, we should still be able to recover from that without any issue. Now, this still does not solve one more problem that was highlighted by the previous bug, which was if there was an error, our controller will keep retrying cloning the VM again and again. Now, that is something actually which you expect out of Kubernetes, to keep trying again and again. So in one sense, it's actually what is expected behavior. But then on the second hand, it could be annoying, because now what if you know what the issue is, but you want to pause it? So maybe there's few things that we can do that, again, it's not in this diagram, but what at least I think is we can have some sort of like a hold annotation that, for example, manually at least, we could put on the machine object. And the idea would be that when the create or update logic comes in, and if it sees that there is a hold annotation present, it basically skips anything that will mutate that object on the vSphere side. So basically don't do any sort of mutation, because we're trying to kind of freeze it. So that way, for example, if you do run into an error, it could present us a way to say, let's put a hold on the object, fix the underlying issue, which could be, well, my data store is not accessible, or the disk is full, or whatever that may be. Like, fix the underlying vSphere issue, and then just remove the hold, and then the controller would basically continue to do what it's supposed to do. Again, so I just want to throw that out yet. I mean, I don't have anything concrete on that part yet. But at least for the changes for this particular diagram, I am currently working on a work in progress PR, which kind of modifies, the workflow to add these two small diagrams, like through elements to that. And I haven't posted that yet, but I thought I'll just briefly, bring this up. If people have any suggestions or questions, please feel free to talk about it.
Well, the first comment I have is, could you please open up an issue and try to put it into words, the issue.
Okay.
The second is, you said that you addressed that, what if you, like the issue, if you get an error back, you put a pause on the workflow and then try to correct the issue. Sometimes, I don't know, in the previous project I worked on, it was impossible sometimes to find out what actually went wrong. Because vSphere has its own state machine, and you're on the outside. And I've experienced a lot of this back when the days when I was doing Windows development. You're at the mercy of the OS giving you errors, specific errors that are informative that you could actually then go and correct. And sometimes they don't, and you just have to apply some kind of heuristics. I'm just throwing that out there. So
no, true. So yeah. Go ahead.
But just to summarize this, let's go ahead and create an issue, and then if you can, post a link to this diagram. And I think I don't want to speak for everybody, but I need some time to digest this offline before I can comment. And I think having an issue open, I can comment in that. And what does everybody else think? Do you guys have any comments now, or do you guys want to take some time to digest?
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I kind of draw a diagram in my notebook when I work on the PR last week. They fixed the reclone issue. So the first question for Siddharth is, I think do we have kind of a cap process already? So I want to follow up with some question around this. And like you're suggesting an issue, either an issue or a cap, kind of so we can have
This
a
will be
place
more of an issue. I mean, this is not really a feature. This is more of a,
Yeah,
I mean, I'll open an issue where we can discuss. That's for sure. I mean, but if you have any question, I mean, I can, I can more than happy to answer that if you have any specific question right now as well.
Yeah, for now, my first question is just, but I want to discuss a bit further if we can have a place. The first question is, you define this instance UUID. Who is going to, I guess, who is going to updating this UUID, and if it's fail, it's going to be the same situation as we are not able to updating task reference or the VM reference.
Okay, so this instance UUID is not being updated, number one. When you create a machine object or any Kubernetes object today, right? If you look at kubectl minus output YAML, they have an ID field, which is a UUID type ID field. What I'm proposing is we kind of use the same ID field of that machine object as the instance UUID of the VM that we are going to create for the representation in the VM form factor of that machine object. So, and that happens in the create spec itself. So there's no update. There's no after the fact that there's one more additional API call that which updates the VM instance UUID. Now, that's not what we're doing. We're saying in the clone operation itself, you now start with specifying that instance UUID to be matching the machine's ID that you're basically creating it against. So even if it fails, for example, it will retry. But let's say if it failed, but if it succeeded, but for whatever reason, when we were trying to update the task ref and that failed, therefore, in our object, machine object, it does not have the task reference to the clone operation, and the controller loop comes back again. Now, what will happen is when the second time it comes along and task ref present is no, now it's going to do, let me search if there is any existing VM with that instance UUID in vSphere. And in this case, if that task succeeded, original task which we couldn't track, unfortunately, succeeded, you will actually get an answer to say, oh, here's the virtual machine that was created. And then you basically start using that VM to set as the VM ref and basically go around the business as move on.
Okay. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I still have some question around this, but
yeah, let's.
Sure. We can talk offline, no problem.
Thanks for the introduction, Siddharth. I think that the next step is to create an issue, and then we can then have a discussion in the issue, and we could bring it up in the next meeting also. But I think I think it sounds like we all need some time offline to digest this. Okay. Does anybody else have any issue, comments, or questions on this before we move on? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. The next, and I'm going to try to move on to these last three very quickly because we're almost out of time. So the last, I just want to bring attention to this this topic. So we created an issue. This is really just to track more for the VMware folks. So we've because most of the development for the last 2 quarters have been within VMware. A lot of the discussions have been internally, and we've been kind of loose in the way that we were handling GitHub. So this is a list of things that I think we can do to improve community involvement, and also try to keep this more public. Try to put everything in the public. So so I'm just going to go through it real quick, and then I'm going to ask for suggestions afterwards. So the areas of improvements I listed was adopt a shared process for issue grooming. Okay, we have started doing that, and to be fair, the rest of Cluster API did not have this capabilities yet. They did not share a single process for issue grooming. In fact, was kind of done ad hoc at times. So we are now both the Cluster API main repo and the vSphere provider and the AWS provider has adopted the kubeadm approach to issue grooming. And I think you guys have seen that we are using milestones and labels now. And we're going to do issue grooming in every single one of these meetings. The next one is adopt a shared process for versioning and building release artifacts. We're waiting. This is a discussion that's going on in the main cluster API and the lifecycle meeting. So we're going to wait till the community figures that out for that repo, and then we're going to adopt it in the vSphere provider. The next one is continue to update the quick start docs on the repo. So thus far, I've been doing this, and other people inside VMware and external, I invite everybody in the community, if you want to update the quick start, this repo doesn't belong to VMware. So if people want to update documents if we vendored some new code from Cluster API and we add in new features, anybody's welcome to update the documents if they want, so that it reflects the changes. Add a more complete documentation to help improve outside participation. Part of this it came from an internal discussion about how we could be more community friendly, and also a discussion in the vSphere, in the main Cluster API working group about the fact that the documentation or maybe the APIs itself does not lead to quick understanding by outside participation. So I have already started a bigger complete documentation that I had to put pause on. That's in Gitbook, and I'm hoping that I can find some time this quarter to finish that and then publish it into our repo. And then Fabio is going to help me try to find a way to host it somehow. The next one, work to get more PR and public meeting participation from parties outside of VMware. So just for everybody on VMware side, I know that we like to discuss a lot of things direct message over Slack, but now we're trying to move to the internal Slack channel, and I'm proposing that we go a step further and discuss everything that the community needs to hear about inside of SIG VMware, in the SIG VMware Slack channel in the Kubernetes workspace. And I've been doing that. I've been visiting that Slack channel 3 or 4 times a day now, and answering questions and addressing issues. So I invite everybody, and Hui did that when he had a PR that was merged. He posted that information on that Slack channel, and I think that's a step that we need to move in. I've noticed that in the community, outside of people like Nate, who's been involved in Cluster API, there are a lot of people who have heard of Cluster API, and they're interested in it, and they may be our customers, and they want to understand what Cluster API and the vSphere provider, what it is, and by just discussing more in that public channel, I think it's going to help the wider community get up to speed. I'm sorry, I skipped one. Work to get more PRs and public meeting participation from parties outside of VMware. So Nate, I want to point out, thank you for the PR. We really appreciate that. We need to do more. I know that we have a couple of VMware employees working on this, and that may signal to outside companies that, VMware has it taken care of. But we actually don't. We need to hear what features and functionalities and issues you have, and we need to try to. And this is a tough topic, and I don't know what the answer is. To try to get more companies involved. I have talked to a couple companies and who were interested, but the vibe I get is that they're waiting for us to finish it, and then they're going to use it. So I'm not sure what is the key to getting them to actively participate and contribute. But any advice or recommendation, I'd love to hear it. Please add it to this thread so that we can all see it. The next one is improve unit tests and integration tests. This is going to be a continual effort till the end of time. And add some level of conformance tests, even if we had to run it manually at first. The question is whether this is under 2019 quarter 1. And because for Q1, I think our focus right now is on getting the main cluster API repo to V1 Alpha 1. But we do, now that we own Heptio has a product called Sonobui that we need to look into to see if we can use that for conformance tests. So here, I just wanted to bring the community attention to this. If there are any other things that we can do to improve, this is just for 1 quarter. Maybe I'll just make this a first half goal, but this is going to continue on. So next half or next quarter, we're going to have another list of things and things that we can work on. And I encourage the community to add more comments on what else we can do, especially around the topic of how do we get other companies more involved instead of waiting until VMware, the couple of VMware engineers on this project, instead of waiting for us to finish the project and then use it. The product the repo can only improve, the project can only improve if we get more comments, concerns, and contributions. Okay, so that was that. That was that announcement. Okay, so I want to go through this really quick. Okay, new issue scrubbing, because this is really important. Cluster API vSphere provider. Here we are. Okay, so the only thing we're going to do right now is go over any new issues that have been filed and try to scrub them. So in case anybody haven't used this product, we use this product called ZenHub. It's free to use. You just sign up and then link it to your GitHub account, and then you get this nice Kanban view or Scrum view of the issues. So let's go ahead and go through this. So the first one is the existing PR. I'm not sure why a PR is under new issues. So we're going to go ahead and skip that one. This next one is from Hui. So this is a bug.
So we can actually close this bug now because Lynn's PR is already merged, and we're going to support multiple cluster in one namespace.
Okay. Okay, I will close it. Has that cluster API PR been merged?
So he opened the PR this morning, and it has an issue, and I found the root cause, and he go back and have to add another fix, but I expecting it's going to be fixed today or tomorrow.
Okay. Okay, we can then move on. Adding machine to target cluster induces Go panic. Well, this seems like a pretty serious one. We don't want panics. So what do you guys think? This sounds like a V1 Alpha 1 issue, right? It's a panic. I think it seems like something we should fix ASAP. Let's just put V1 Alpha 1, and this is we're going to do our best. So it's a bug. And for V1 Alpha 1s, I'm going to put into to-dos. Let's see if there's a priority. Put important soon.
Look, I just want to give a time check. We're
we're at time. So I'm gonna try to finish this, and then we'll finish the meeting. The next one, Siddharth. vSphere should use. What do you think? Instead of discussing it, because I know what you're talking about. What do you think? Is this a Nex or is this a V1 Alpha 1?
I mean, my personal take is, I mean, since this is related to security, we should, if it's better if we handle it in V1 Alpha 1, just to make it, like, whatever release we're getting.
Just to let you know, if this is V1 Alpha 1, you're implementing it, because a lot of us are helping out on the main cluster API repo right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think given we have shorter time, let's move on. Maybe in the next one, I can bring up like some caveats with this particular issue. Maybe we can talk at the next session.
So do you not want to put a milestone yet?
No, I think we can put it on the milestone, but I mean, there's a sort of a chicken and egg problem in the implementation side and I don't know the correct answer for that. So maybe I can bring that up next.
Okay, so it's V1 Alpha 1, right? So this is a feature. And I'm not going to put a priority on. You can go ahead and put a priority if you want.
Sure, I can.
Okay. And the last one is handle the case when VM clones are not. I know what you're talking about, Hui. This is an issue where the VM doesn't come up and we can't. Okay, you already put milestone and labels on. So for next, we're going to just go ahead and put in the backlog. And then we'll revisit these backlog issue come next quarter. Okay. And with that, I wanted to address the last question, but unfortunately we're out of time, and we can talk about this on the SIG VMware Slack channel on the Kubernetes workspace. So with that, I think we can conclude the meeting has finished, and I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for your participation, and I guess we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.